Hello, this is John Armwood on the Armwood Opinion Channel, and this is my third and final segment on the integration of the New York schools during the 1960s and 1970s. The first segment dealt with the early 60s from 61 on forward during basically my elementary school days. And the second segment dealt with my turbulent junior high school days. And this final segment deals with my college days. And my college days, undergraduate school, was spent at Hunter College, City University of New York. I got some negative feedback on my second video, my second narrative, because it covered some very, very painful and raw experiences for me, and I felt that it was very important to me that I not cover up the anger I had felt and the hurt feelings that I had felt as a result of that experience. I think it's very important that we don't put on this false facade of toughness. They didn't get to me. That a lot of people, particularly I've noticed people that are a good bit younger, feel it's necessary. It's part of that hip hop culture. You didn't faze me. I reject that. I don't think it's healthy. And modern psychology, clinical psychology rejects that. In fact, I had a discussion with my son about that very, very issue. And he had said that I seemed like I was defeated, and I think I was triumphant. And I think this video will attest to that. I think there's a lot that young people can learn from senior citizens, and especially people who came through the struggles of the 60s and 70s. Because our struggles made it a lot easier for those younger people. And yes, they do have the struggles, and yes, things are still very bad. I was just reading in the paper yesterday about a woman who was dragged off the floor with her child in Brooklyn, New York, because she had been waiting for 2 hours holding her child, and she was tired and sat down. And she was brutally abused by police and security officers. It was in the New York Times. So this stuff is still happening. Police shootings, we know, continue. But today, I want to talk about what for me was a life-changing event. And that was my entry into Hunter College of the City University of New York in 1971. I can still remember the very first day of registration. Hunter College is at 695 Park Avenue, between Park and Lex on its west and east side, and between 68th and 69th on its south and north side. It's expanded some over the years, but as a backdrop, during the late 60s, Hunter moved from being an all-female school to a co-ed school, And then in the very late 60s, black and Latino students demanded a open admissions policy throughout the city that would expand the schools from being virtually all white to include minority students. And these include shutdowns and strikes at Hunter and City University of New York, and or elites of the City University at that time. And just as I mentioned, you guys have heard of Donna Shalala. She was president when I graduated from Hunter. She's now a congressman in Florida, was in the Obama administration, first female chancellor of a university of Wisconsin. So it was a pretty interesting place to be. I came there, I remember, in 1971, and right after Labor Day, and my first day registering, a young man, full out hippie type guy, really nice guy with long hair and friendly. He told me at registration, look, the Black Student Union is having an orientation. You should go. So I said, okay, that sounded interesting to me. So I went, and it was just down the hall. And when I walked in, it was just getting started. And Professor John Henrik Clark, who has become one of the legendary figures in the African American movement, the Africana Studies movement. He's celebrated both at Hunter and Cornell, where he taught at both schools, was introducing a person that I knew from television. His name was Gil Noble. He was on the evening news on Saturday and Sunday, and he was one of two black newsmen on television in 1971, the other being Bob Teague. Gil Noble was on ABC, and Bob Teague was on Metro Media, which was Channel 5, which unfortunately now is New York's Fox News outlet. But he, on television, looked extremely conservative and very, very non-threatening. And, that's how my mother had raised me to be. But when he started talking that day, he was talking about how Malcolm X had influenced him and had changed his life. And he started out being conservative. All he cared about was chasing women and partying, etc. And that how initially he had rejected Malcolm until some of his friends had brought him to meet Malcolm. You can go on YouTube and you can just look up Gil Noble, and you'll see his story. Later on, he had a TV show for many years called Like It Is, which was arguably the finest show on African American history and culture in New York City history. But his speaking and me seeing him and expressing his political views about Africa, about the Caribbean, about the United States being one struggle against Euro-American imperialism, hit me like a brick in my chest, and it just brought everything that I had experienced, that I talked about, the racism in Volume 2, together with the readings that I had been doing on my own throughout high school and before. Because I had been very much into leftist politics. I had read, Mao, I had read Marx, I had read those things. It was anything that was anti-American I wanted to read. And that was the days of the Vietnam War, and I was, from the age of 16, I was protesting against the war. And so when I saw these black folks talking about socialism, African socialism, talking about the need for black people to unify around the world, the Pan-Africanist movement, and talking about people like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Sekou Touré, Emile Cabral, who was in Guinea-Bissau, who I got to meet later on in a class led by John Henrik Clark. These people opened my mind up and my heart up to a new worldview that made sense, that brought clarity to my painful experiences of earlier. And I began to see them not as necessarily individual experiences, that the pain and the individual racism I experienced was not personal, it was structural. It was designed that way when the colonization of the Western Hemisphere occurred. And we also had a Latino sequence in it was the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at the time. And it was predominantly Puerto Rican because that's what the city was at that time. It was Black and Latino among the minority population. And we worked together. And the departments shared a common vision that America was basically what Rand called America later, the Great Satan. America was the problem. America was the hegemon, as the Chinese call America, who was dictating to the world and had taken the mantle up from European colonization. This made me feel relieved, stress-free. I got to meet teachers, the chairman of the department and Professor Tilden Lumel, who later became provost at Hunter. He gave me reading. I took Black Political Thought my first semester, and I got to develop a framework for understanding my struggle. I started reading Frantz Fanon and Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Julius Nyerere, among others, from the Caribbean, people like Walter Rodney, and of course Eric Williams, Capitalism, Slavery's monumental work. C.L.R. James, talking, his story, the Black Jacobins, the history of the Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave rebellion in human history. Learned about the Maroons in Jamaica, the Maroons in Guyana, and about Black people's struggles around the world and what we had in common. And that just was a healing force in my life. It just made me so happy to understand that I was not alone. And a lot of my anger, some people would call bitterness, was based in my feeling of aloneness, because I was the only Black kid in my class from the 3rd grade to the 12th grade. But once I started seeing and reading this material and meeting these people, reading people like Aswan Sabine from Senegal, and the book Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe and Arrow of God from Ghana, it all made sense. The divisions that some people still talk about by people of people of color began to disappear to me. And Hunter was very multicultural. One of my best friends there in my later years there was a brother from South Africa, a poet, Duma Nduvu, who in fact I was in email contact recently. Actually not email, but Facebook Messenger contact recently. And so going to parties from folks from the Caribbean and from folks from South Africa, it was really just an amazing experience for me. And it brought so much joy and hope and happiness to my life. So Hunter was just a revelation to me in what life could be and what the world could be from the perspective of a Black person or a Latino person as being in a position of power, reacting. We had student strikes in 70, I believe it was 73. I was involved in student strikes, but there were numerous student strikes at Hunter and City College, starting from the late 60s to the 70s. So, sat in the president's office over cutbacks in student aid for disadvantaged kids. I mean, the camaraderie we developed. Now, there were some teachers who were not in our Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies who did not like the fact that our political positions were not the same as the political science department, because I was a double major in political science and Africana studies. And back then they called it Black and Puerto Rican Studies. And I had one professor, Professor Richter, that refused to accept Frantz Fanon as a legitimate theorist. And it's so great now, as a retired professor, to have seen Frantz Fanon's names in the textbooks that I taught students, and to see how wrong these people were. I had a professor in political science. I used to laugh at him. He called me a communist, and I kept on telling him, I'm not a communist. I'm a Pan-Africanist. And I've given you books to read, but you refuse to read them. I've been experiencing that with a lot of, white, it's so-called intellectuals over many, many years. We're talking about 40 years ago, that same issue was going on. Wouldn't read. Only would read white sources, would not read sources of peoples of color. So all of that brought joy to my life and gave a direction in my life. So my life politically has been about maximizing the interests of people of color around the world. That has been my central focus since my college years, starting in 1971. And I'm very thankful for Hunter College for having people there who cared. We would sit in Myrna Bain, one of my favorite, probably my favorite professor, and the professor I modeled myself after, sitting in her office at 6:30 and 7 o'clock at night with other students, and she just mentoring us and talking to us. And back then, the drinking age in New York was wine. It was 18, so we'd sit up and drink wine sometimes and just talk about issues. And she would battle with the administration when the administration did things that were not right. And it was just wonderful to have professors like that. And Jaffa Kasmali, who was from Tanzania. Jim Horton, who coined the phrase, they say cut back, we say fight back, was a mentor to me also. And in fact, he set up my first real solid full-time job working for the electric utility in New York, Con Edison, for 10 years. I got a job there, and another brother from Puerto Rico, a Puerto Rican brother, Jose, we got both of us jobs there because he was a union organizer, and the electric utility was not hiring people of color or Jews. And so there was a force to integrate that. And as a result of that, I got into that company and stayed there 10 years. And that led me later on going into law school. My law school experience was at Emory in Atlanta was not as positive. I mean, I did well, but politically the school was rather conservative. Though there was one professor that I liked a lot there, Tim Terrell. And I got to do some interesting writing. But I became under the influence of Harvard professor Derek Bell a year or two before I had gotten there through his writings. And I started to understand the fact that racism is permanent, that's structural, that was an intentional, functional component put into place after Bacon's Rebellion in 1876. I talked about that in my first video on this channel, and it led to me to a place of happiness. That's where I learned that I could bring meaning to my life by struggling against oppression. And that is like a mission in my life. And it's been a mission of members of my family dating back at least 4 or 5 generations that I can document. And I'm sure it goes back a lot farther than that. So I'm going to cut this volume off because I've been talking rather long, because believe me, I live a happy life. Jazz became the central influence of my life while I was in high school and college also. And that brought me joy because jazz was, to me, the triumph of people of African descent over Euro-American culture, Euro-American imperialism. It was something that they could not do as well as we could do, and they could never steal from us, no matter how much they tried. And anybody can share anyone's culture. I don't mean it in that sense, but I meant it was a sense of triumph. It had a philosophy, and where communitarian interests and individuality were not at odds, as many Western writers and philosophers see it. And it made me just like be totally bored by people like John Rawls and conservatives like Robert Nozick, and even liberals who I had sympathy for the writings of people like Ronald Dworkin. But no, I had my own vision, and later it came under the umbrella of what we call critical race studies, and I've been an advocate of that for over 30 years. And I just want to thank you for your time. Hit the like button if you enjoy this video, and subscribe to my channel. And thank you for this time and your time during this three-part segment on the integration of the schools. And that final segment today was the integration of Hunter and the City University, which was brought about by students and student strikes. And I must mention that in the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department, students were instrumental in hiring the faculty. They demanded a seat in the table, and they got it. And that's how we got people like Tilden Lamel, John Henry Clark, and Myrna Bain. And later on, people like Jim Horton, major figures in the struggle against oppression here in America. Thank you very much. And remember, as one of the videos I used to show when I was chairman of the Black Student Union, a luta continua. The struggle continues.
Hey!